And I understand that that event impacted everyone. I don't mean to minimize that. It's just that it impacted my life a little bit more than other people because, and I didn't know it at that time, but I was about to be sucked into a major controversy. 4 days after 9/11, a former student of mine, I don't like to use names, but a former student of mine by the name of Rosa Fuller, whoops, it slipped out. It'll slip out a few more times in just a minute, but at any rate, she was this student that I'd had the year before, and when I call her a communist, I'm not trying to be mean, she really was a communist. I taught her before, and this was the kind of student who would show up to class wearing combat boots and a beret. Very intelligent, except for the love of communism, okay? And I'd had her about a year before, hadn't really thought about her since then, and then all of a sudden, I get this email, and it's something like 21 people are CC'd on this email, where she has written this essay, it's about 500 words long, called In Dedication to an Undivided Humanity, in which she explains how the attacks of 9/11 were the fault of the United States of America. We deserve to be attacked because of our foreign policy. And I read this thing, and I was so infuriated because it was 4 days after 9/11 when she wrote this thing. And, you know, you think about the climate in the country right after 9/11, all we knew at that point was that a lot of people had died. We didn't know it was 3,000. People actually thought it was tens of thousands because right after the attack took place, Mayor Rudy Giuliani actually contacted the feds and he ordered 30,000 body bags to be sent from the federal government to New York City. And we figured out later on it's because a lot of the bodies were blown to just dozens of bits, basically. And that's the reason why they needed the separate body bags. But we just didn't know. We knew that we couldn't talk to people in Manhattan for about 6 weeks. You couldn't make a phone call into Manhattan. And so I've got friends and acquaintances, not really close ones, but people that I was worried about. You don't know if people are alive or dead. You just have no idea. And she sends this thing. And boy, did I ever respond. Do you guys want to know what I wrote to her in that first email? I'll bet you do, but I can't say it because we're at Summit Ministries. I might have lost my temper just a little bit, but I did the right thing after I wrote that email, and I hit the delete button. Don't ever send an email when you're angry, okay? And that's the reason why I just drive to the DMV. I don't send them emails, okay? But at any rate, man, I waited, I think, 4 days till I think it was the 19th. And I rewrote something to her. It was a very short paragraph, and in that paragraph I said, you know, the Constitution protects your speech just as it has protected bigoted, unintelligent, and immature speech for many years. But whenever you exercise your rights, you open up yourself to criticism by others who are protected by the same principles. Pretty simple. And I've had some Summit students pull me aside after this lecture over the years and say, wasn't that harsh? Let me answer that. No. I didn't say that she was a bigot and she was immature and she was I said that the speech was. It is bigoted to say that thousands of people deserve to die. It is immature to say that 4 days after the attacks. And what did I say? Bigoted, unintelligent, and immature. Well, of course, the idea that there's not much intelligence behind that. I mean, I just thought it was a screed, okay? Sorry. And I was describing her speech. And I didn't think anything about it. But her mother thought something about it because her mother just happened to be an administrator at UNC Wilmington. And so she calls the provost, who is my boss and the vice president of the entire university, and he calls me at home. And I get this phone call, and he says, well, you know, we've got a problem because you have violated the email computer use policy. I didn't realize it, but we had started at our school to develop, beyond the principal speech code, several other satellite speech codes. So we actually had a special, unique speech code just for dealing with email use. And it had that same vague language about how you can't use offensive speech. And one of the words was that you can't berate people, okay? And so what they did was to say that that I had called her bigoted, unintelligent, immature, and that was libel, and they were going to sue me, but in order to sue me, they needed to actually go into my email account, and they were asking to read every single email message I had sent for a period of 1 week. to figure out if I had forwarded the message to anyone else. By the way, at the end of her message, it said forward it to other people who might be interested in joining the discussion. I did forward it to 6 people in the United States Marines who were friends of mine and said, why don't you respond to her? Okay, but that was her request. But she actually wanted to go into the email account and just read all my messages for a week. Furthermore, the parties were asking for the right to have a copy, a log of the names and private email addresses of every single person that I'd communicated with. And so I was sitting there on the phone with the provost, my boss, and I couldn't believe the breadth of the request. And so I slowly explained to him that they were not going into my email account. I said, here's the deal, John. John Kavanaugh was my provost. I said, it's very simple. The email use policy says I had no right whatsoever to say the things that I said. However, the United States Constitution says that I do have a right to say the things that I said. So what we have here, John, is a conflict of laws between the faculty handbook and the United States Constitution. In such a scenario, the United States Constitution wins, not the UNCW student and faculty handbook. Do you understand what I'm explaining to you? He's my boss. Man, I must have been tickied off to talk to him like that, but I don't regret it because he goes, yeah, I understand. Have a good day. And he just gets off the phone and you're like, woo, good story. No, I would not be a summit speaker if that were the story, okay? It wasn't over because about 10 days later, I actually got a phone call from the university council saying, we're going to go in and we're going to read your email messages. We have to do that, okay? Now, by the way, another question I've gotten about this portion of the lecture is some people will say, well, you were using a university computer and you were actually using your university account, therefore you had no right to privacy, right? No. There is a specific right to privacy that was written into our policy. It says you have private messages and public records. There are 2 different categories. Furthermore, individuals who think that you have no right to privacy when you're using university property, I mean, what does that mean? The state owns the stalls in the bathrooms. That doesn't mean that the administration can peek over when you're in there doing your business, ladies and gentlemen. You don't have a complete civil death when you step onto a college campus. So I knew this, of course, and knew that the action was illegal. Well, I'll tell you what I did when things started to come to a head, basically. I got on the phone and I called 215-717-3473. That's 215-THE-FIRE. And I called my friend Alan Charles Kors, and I spoke to him about that. I'd only talked to him a couple of times via email before, but I'd been following his work, and he shared the story with John Leo, who was the main opinion columnist for U.S. News and World Report, which is the 3rd largest magazine in the United States of America. And after they went in and read those emails, John Leo called, and he asked them, he said, why did you read his emails? And the university said, we didn't read his emails. And then they called me on the phone and they said, did they read your emails? And I said, yes, they read my emails. And John Leo said, someone is lying. It's either you or the university. And I told John Leo, I said, I will take a polygraph exam. He said, the university is lying. And I'm going to write about this in U.S. News and World Report. It'll be out on next Tuesday. And so, of course, I go into Barnes & Noble and I get a copy and I'm reading it and I'm going, this is kind of cool. I kind of like this. But I wasn't the only one that read that story. Sean Hannity read the story. And he called me on the phone in the office the next day and he said, would you like to come on Hannity and Colmes on Fox News? I responded with 2 words, giddy up, because I'm from Texas. By the way, that means yes. And I actually went on Hannity and Colmes, and it was amazing because Hannity, the conservative, and Colmes, the liberal, both were on my side. And the whole thing went viral after that. Rush Limbaugh picks up the story. Neil Bortz picks up the story. The Boston Globe picks up the story. NPR picks up the story. The Chronicle of Higher Education, the Washington Times. This smattering of national news outlets, both conservative and liberal. And I had told them before they went in and read the emails, and these were my exact words, I said, if you do this, there will be public relations nuclear warfare. I promised this thing would happen. And all of a sudden, my provost, John Kavanaugh, starts to get hundreds of emails from all across the country criticizing the actions of the university. And he actually wrote to me during the controversy and he says, "Can you help me out?" I responded to him and I said, "No, I can't help you out. You made a decision and now you have to live with the consequences. Welcome to Conservatism 101. This is the new Mike Adams who converted." And this whole thing explodes, and the public relations disaster became so intense that at the end of the controversy, John Kavanaugh issued a public statement saying, "We support Mike Adams' right to speak out on any issue whatsoever." Big mistake. I printed out that email and framed it and put it on the wall of my office. And I went home for Christmas of the year 2001, and I came back in the year 2002, and I said, "You know what? I've got tenure at this point." I said, "The problem is so intense on our campuses, and I hate the fact that there are only 2 college professors, Coors and Silverglate, who are doing anything about it." I said, "I'm joining the fight." And so I started to write a column for the American Family Association's Agape Press. And I did that. I wrote 10 columns, and then on the 10th column, for some reason, Rush Limbaugh read something that I wrote. He thought it was so funny that he put my picture on his website and read the thing on the air. Explosion. I get a phone call the next day at my office. "Hey, professor, this is Bill." "Bill who?" "Bill O'Reilly." "Oh, really?" He's like, "No, O'Reilly." It's going to get worse. I speak to you 4 times. It'll get a lot worse, okay? It'll be constant puns. I'm a criminal justice professor. Some have suggested I belong in the penitentiary. But at any rate, he says, "Would you like to go on the O'Reilly Factor?" And I did, and just basically talked about the column that I'd written. Jonathan Garthwaite, the editor of townhall.com, just happened to be watching. He told me he didn't even watch TV, basically, but he happened to be watching that evening. He invited me to write a column for townhall.com, and then all of a sudden, I got a major website, a major national platform. After writing 4 columns, I got a book deal. As a result of the book deal, I got an invitation to do a book signing and speak at CPAC. As a result of that, I got hired by Patrick Coyle, who's the president of Young America's Foundation. As a result of that, I've spoken on 80 campuses across America. As a result of that, a guy by the name of Frank Turek, who you'll meet next week, just happened to show up at one of those speeches, and he called a guy by the name of Doc Noble, who is the founder of Summit Ministries, and said, "You got to have this guy come out and talk about this issue at Summit Ministries." So I wanted to share that with you because I had a moment where I could either sit back and allow them to violate my rights, or I could instead call the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education. And it has completely transformed my life. I would not be standing here speaking to you if I didn't stand up and do the right thing. So I wanted to share that phone number and that website with you so that if anything ever happens to you, you'll realize something. That even though he was a leftist, politically speaking, Justice Louis Brandeis in 1914, when he declared that sunlight is often the most powerful of disinfectants, he was speaking truth, wasn't he? Sometimes when public officials do things that are illegal and they know it, the best way to do it is to fight the battle in the court of public opinion. And that is exactly what the Fire does. They don't litigate cases for you, but they make sure that the entire country knows when someone is violating your rights.